Self-talk. It's one of those things that has unfortunately gotten a little bit of a bad rap, because when we think of self-talk, we automatically think of people chanting demonic mantras into the mirror or pumping themselves up just before they're about to walk on some hot coals at a self-help conference. But self-talk is an incredibly useful skill to acquire and develop if you choose to use it in the right way. And those who do use it in the right way are often those that reach the top in their respective performance domain. And this happens because top performers realize that there are different types of self-talk, each one being appropriate in different situations. So today's video is going to talk about the 4 different types of self-talk so that you can better use this skill and perform at your best far more often. But first, I just want to talk about why self-talk is so important. And by self-talk, in case the term isn't self-explanatory enough, I mean the act or practice of talking to oneself either aloud or silently. So you can do it internally, but I argue it's far better to actually verbalize your self-talk. And the reason for this is because some studies show that we have 36,000 thoughts every day, so that's around 25 per minute. So verbalizing something automatically narrows your thinking onto just one thing, so you can ultimately detach from that scrambled inner dialogue that we all have from time to time. So let's get it out of the way. The first type of self-talk is, of course, motivational. And so this is a type of self-talk that obviously does exactly what it says on the tin. It's used to motivate us, to pump ourselves up and to prepare us for some sort of action. But I think we've got to be a bit more considerate about when is it actually appropriate to use motivational self-talk. Because I believe that we should only use this type of self-talk when we're desperate. So hear me out here. Motivational self-talk is all about lifting our mood so that we can then feel like performing or doing something. But most of the time we don't need a motivational boost because we're often in control of the situation at hand. Because things are running smoothly, whether it's running a race, preparing a speech, or revising for an exam, we don't feel the need to kind of pump ourselves up because our practice or our performance is actually going pretty well. And because it's going well, we feel energized, we feel pumped up anyway, so we don't really need that motivational boost. In contrast, when things start to go badly, that's when we get that nagging in our head. It's telling us to stop, it's telling us to give up, or it quite simply tells us we're doomed to fail. So it's those times where every step is hurting in the last 3 miles of a 26-mile marathon, or it's when you're revising or studying and you've read something for the 4th time and you just can't for the life of you comprehend what you've read. These are the typical situations in which we're a whisker away from just giving up and throwing in the towel, and therefore that's when we need a proper motivational boost. And the actual content of the self-talk that we then use is actually irrelevant. It just has to be something that gives us a sense of hope or gives us a purpose to continue persevering. And that's it. I think motivational self-talk, it should only be used in those times in which we're on our knees and we're really desperate, where we've exhausted all other potential options before we're due to quit, give up, or accept failure. And because of this, it's therefore important to engage with the 3 other types of self-talk far more frequently. And the first of those is instructional. And no prizes for guessing what this one entails. It quite simply involves actually verbalizing the instructions of what we need to do in order to perform a specific action or task at hand. So this would be incredibly useful for, say, a football player who needs to map out their specific actions that they're going to do during a set piece or a set play. Or it could be a dancer who is learning a new routine and just before the next rerun actually verbalizing all the different moves that go into that dance sequence. So with these examples in mind, it's apparent that instructional self-talk is very useful when there's a strong degree of complexity in what we're trying to complete. And unfortunately, this type of self-talk is often underutilized because by default we go for the motivational kind, but that is not always appropriate in a lot of situations. So let's be realistic. Would you be confident in a heart surgeon who just before slicing someone up started giving it some Ric Flair woos to pump himself up? Probably not. You'd rather him actually start verbalizing the steps in the operation. So instructional self-talk is really important in those situations where there is a degree of complexity, where we need to actually map out the specific actions, because if we don't, we can very easily get mixed up and therefore get caught up in our emotions and start making a lot of unnecessary mistakes. And the next type of self-talk is a direct follow-on from the instructional self-talk, which is focus self-talk. This tends to be used in tasks in which there is far less complexity, but there's still maybe a lot more distractions to keep at bay and to block out. So the typical situation being sports stars having to block out boos from the opposing fans or even cheers from their own fans so that they can fully concentrate on the specific task at hand. And focused self-talk is also key to help us forget about time constraints or dwindling game clocks, those time pressure situations that we often find ourselves in. And one of the most simple but effective phrases that embodies this focused self-talk would be just concentrate, or something related to the specific task at hand. So if you're putting up free throws, you might just say to yourself, ball and net, and repeat that over to yourself. The content doesn't necessarily matter, but what it's doing is just enabling you to focus on one thing. And again, it just goes back to the point of using this as a method to detach ourselves from that internal racing monologue that comes about from all those external distractions, so that we can just focus on one thing, specifically the task at hand, so that we can then do it to the best of our ability. And finally, the last type of self-talk is calming. So this is obviously used in those situations in which we become over-aroused.
Not sexual, you know.
Where we start to maybe feel frustrated, a bit too aggressive, maybe anxious or panicky. And the problem is when we're in that state, that's when we start to lose control over both our mind and body, and therefore we start making a heck of a lot more mistakes. So a typical versatile form of this type of self-talk is the very classic phrase of just take a deep breath. But there are other great types of calming self-talk, particularly with the focus of trying to take the sting out of the tail of the situation and to make light of it and also belittle it a little bit. So when I film these videos, there are still infinite times in which I mess up my lines and I get really off. And despite several takes, for some reason I just can't get the words out. And so to stop myself getting like so frustrated, I will ultimately just say to myself, it's just a video. And that phrase, it's just, has such a calming effect because it does put things into perspective and makes the task seem far less overwhelming. And I think this is a phrase that's very useful for anyone, regardless of your performance domain or your craft. So even if a certain sport is your life, or if you're a professional musician, or if you're a student, it's great to add this "it's just" when we start to feel overwhelmed. So you can say, it's just basketball, or it's just a guitar, or it's just an exam. And you know, the point here is not to necessarily stop caring, but it's just to get you to realize that you've perhaps become a bit too consumed with whatever it is that you're struggling with. And it will just allow you to kind of ground yourself so you can ultimately reflect on what really is the cause of your struggle and therefore find the best solution possible. So to wrap up, self-talk is an incredibly useful mental skill to acquire and develop, but you have to use the right type in the right situations. The motivational kind is still useful, it just needs to be used in those times in which it's kind of the last resort and where we really are desperate. Then we should think about using the instructional kind when we're trying to be clearer on complex tasks and activities. And the focus kind is then really useful in those situations in which we need to block out external distractions. And the calming type is very useful in those situations in which we start feeling overwhelmed. And of course, there are going to be those situations in which the demands placed upon us do overlap. So of course, at times you will be using self-talk that embodies multiple of the different types that we've discussed today. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've now got a good understanding of how to use self-talk effectively. And if you've got any questions about it, drop those in the comments below. If you like the video, do give it a thumbs up. And if you want future videos on other key mental performance skills, then do hit that subscribe button and I will see you in the next video.